All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of Beauty Calls. I'm Dr. Z, and I'm really excited about today's interview. We have a guest named Elwin Robinson, and he's calling in from Northern England. So, about 5 hours time difference from where we're at here in North Carolina. And what he's doing is really cool. He's using our genetic code to help identify what types of problems, issues, health issues, in general that we might be more likely to encounter given what is written in our DNA. And so I'm really looking forward to learning about how he got into all of this and exactly what we can gain from knowing more about our DNA in preventing diseases or treating problems that we're already encountering and having a hard time figuring out why we can't get over them. So, Elwin, thank you so much for being here.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So let's start off and talk about kind of. I know that you had some personal issues with the gastrointestinal problems that sort of led you to the discoveries that you've made to this point and the beginning of your current your company in helping other people identify possible problems with themselves. So, do you mind telling us a little bit about that journey and the issues that you suffered from before you figured out how to overcome them?
Yeah, absolutely. So, in my 20s, by the time I was in my late 20s, I started to struggle with my health a lot. And I won't go into that whole story, but eventually I got better. And I was, people were so often asking for my help that I actually started to do that. I was selling kind of herbs and supplements online and doing like videos on YouTube. And I was feeling pretty good for, I'd say, almost a decade. And then suddenly I started to feel really bad. So specifically, I started to get this pain around my right midsection area, which was not constant, but almost constant, like most of the time. I had an MRI, CT scan, bloods, all of this kind of chiropractic investigation, osteopath, functional medicine. Uh, you
Appendix.
know, Sorry.
I said appendix investigation.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, it was higher than that. Yeah, but you name it, right? They investigated everything and they could not really find any issues. And so this led me on a journey of finding finding a solution for myself. Now, that was the least of it, the pain in the end. So it developed. I wasn't able to eat very much. And so I ended up losing a lot of weight. I'm 6'3" and I went from 140 pounds. No, sorry, 150 pounds. I was already quite light to like 120 pounds. I wouldn't say I was
Wow.
emaciated, but I was getting there. It was pretty bad for
What
someone
age
who
are
was
you
trying
talking
their
about?
best. Sorry.
Yeah. What age are you talking about right now?
This is about 40.
Oh, 40 years old. Okay. So prior to that, like in adolescence or early adulthood, you didn't really have issues.
I'd always been a bit underweight. People always called me skinny, but I wasn't like emaciated. Like I said, I was like 150 pounds, something like that
But not
throughout
the
most of my
pain
life.
or issues like that.
Oh, no, no. I mean, I had not ideal digestion. Like I had to be a little bit careful of what I ate, but I just accepted that. And especially in the alternative health world, it's very common, right? Like not
Mhm.
eating gluten and things like that is considered to be normal. So if I ate
Right.
what was considered like a healthy diet, then I was fine
Okay.
up until this point. And then
So this kind of
suddenly,
caught you off guard, right?
yeah, suddenly I was not fine anymore. I could count on one hand the foods that I could eat without having some kind of reaction to them. It was pretty much everything that would cause gas and more pain, more discomfort, more reflux and all this kind of stuff. And I was also my mental health really cratered. I would say I went from having fairly high levels of confidence, and I traveled the world. About a third of the time I was away from home, traveling across different countries and all the rest of it. And I went to barely leaving my house. I was filled with anxiety. I think eventually I got probably what was called depression because it was just like nothing's working, no one can help me. It's getting worse and worse. So that's the kind of position that I was in. So I didn't have like a terrible diagnosis like some people do of like something life threatening, but except for at one point they thought I had something called Brugada syndrome, which is kind of like a death sentence. The average age that you die if you have Brugada syndrome is 40, and I got this diagnosis at the age of 40. but
Yeah.
But it turned out that was an incorrect diagnosis. It was some kind of temporary arrhythmia that was misdiagnosed. But anyway, but
Gotcha.
almost having this kind of problem where you can barely function and having no one be able to tell you what on earth's going on with you is even worse in a way, I would say, from my experience anyway, than being told you have something seriously wrong. And, you know, as I said, I wasn't able to function. I was constantly on this roller coaster. And so, yeah, I was pretty desperate. And the first thing that I found that really helped me was, you know, insights into genetics, which led me to ultimately wanting to share that with people.
So, how long did you go through this period of uncertainty?
Of complete uncertainty, about a year and a half. Yeah, it
Okay.
started in kind of mid 2019 until, no, I suppose almost 2 years. Yeah, mid 21. Yeah, 2 years.
And then you discovered what was the company called?
So the company that I used was called SelfDecode.
SelfDecode. Was it a company that had tried to help you identify problems, health problems, or was it one of the kind of just ancestry DNA companies?
Yeah, so this was a company that specifically helps with health problems.
Okay, so you had to give them a sample of your DNA.
So this was one of the cool things about it. Back in 2013, when I was feeling great still, my wife and I both did a 23andMe because, you
Mhm.
know, we were interested in our ancestry. My wife got into it more than me. She was like contacting these long distant relatives, but I just looked at it and went, yeah, mainly European, not a huge surprise, and kind of set it aside, didn't think about it
Right.
again. But then, you know, when I came across, I think it was an email or some kind of ad for this service, it said, you know, if you have that information already, you can upload it to our system, and within a few hours, we will be able to tell you all these different things about you. And I was like, well, that sounds good, because by then I'd done a lot of tests as well already. You know, both with
Mhm.
the medical system
Yep.
and private tests, and you know what testing is like. It's expensive. You tend to have to wait a long time. It's often inconvenient.
Absolutely.
And so I thought, wow, you know, getting all this information within a few hours with something I've already got is cool. And so when I got the results, I was more blown away. I mean, first of all, how accurate it was, at least in my case, because that, you know, that was the first one I'd seen, obviously. But second of all, what really blew me away is it seemed to predict, and as I went more and more into it, I discovered this is more and more the case. It seemed to predict that I would have health issues that back then I didn't have, but I did, you know, when I did the test. So
Wow.
it was interesting that, you know, a genetic saliva sample from, you know, 7, 8 years ago, whatever it was, could have predicted and if I'd have known, prevented all these problems from occurring in the first place.
Well, now, before we get into all those details, I've actually never done one of those tests before. I know they're really popular, but I've not seen what the results actually look like. So, what kind of data do they give you? Is it a printout, or um, they
Yeah.
don't
So
actually do your entire genome?
no, they will give you a CSV file. So what they're looking for is what they're going to give you is a bunch of code, and what each person who's reading that is looking for is SNPs. So do you want me to go into explaining that?
Well, sure. Like they're telling you if you have certain genes or not.
So we
Like how thorough is the report that they give you that then you could upload it to this other company and it's useful data? Because I thought it was just like your probability of being certain ethnicity or race or where your ancestors came from.
No, it's a lot more than that. It's not your whole genome, but you know, a lot of the genome is what they call junk DNA, right? I don't think that's an accurate term, but at least it's not worth reviewing from their point of view. So while
Hmm.
they are assessing a relatively small portion of the genome, it's a genome that gives you a lot of information. So no, even though companies like Ancestry and 23andMe are only giving you ancestry information and fairly simple health information, you can take that same information, give it to a different service like ours, but honestly, we're not the only ones, like many others as well. And they will be able to tell you extremely detailed information, especially if they're a good service like ours, based on that part of the genome that all these companies do evaluate.
Okay, so you had the CSV file from 7 years prior.
Yeah, you can download it. It's not always easy to find, but if you're Ancestry 23andMe, MyHeritage, whatever, you can go in and you're like, where do I download my raw data? And then you
Oh,
can
got it.
download the CSV file with your raw data.
Got it. So they give you a report of limited information, but you can access the more complete files.
They give their interpretation of that information, which is Ancestry and maybe a few health things, very simply. But that raw data, someone else can take it and
Hmm.
give a much better view of it. It's like
Yeah.
let's say it's like a really great book like the Bible, right? You can give it to one person and they'll, maybe give you a couple of interesting things out, but you take it to another person and they will give you thousands of hours of philosophy and all the amazing lessons that can be learned from it. It's about who decodes and unpacks and interprets the information,
Hmm.
if that makes
Got it.
sense.
And so, getting back to then when you got your report from this company, um, I don't mean to sound cynical, but I can envision a lot of like bogus companies who would just sort of approach this like you've seen not a horoscope or like the Chinese menus that have what animal are you based on the year you were born, and we'll tell
Sure.
you your personality traits. And somebody can identify with all of them. So they didn't have things on there like occasional back pain and headaches, fatigue, things that everybody deals with, so that when you read it, you're like, ah, yes, that's me. What made you really believe that it was true when you got that report? Like, how specific was it that you knew it wasn't just a coincidence?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I will tell you, God, I don't want it to sound disparaging, but I have used a lot of other services after this while I was researching before setting up my own thing.
Hmm.
And I'll be honest, most of them that I tested did give information that was so low in accuracy, it was almost random. So
Generic.
yeah, so they got some things right, but not more than you'd expect by statistical probability. I've got
Got
a
it.
kind of mathematical brain. I think more in terms of probability than black and white. So, I feel like I can assess that reasonably well. And yeah, I would say a lot of them were not more accurate than probability would dictate. Um, the thing that powers SelfDecode and also now powers Genetic Insights, which is my own company, is this thing called Omics Edge. And they have several dozen data scientists, so AI engineers on full time working for them. They have several dozen research scientists working for them.
Hmm.
I don't believe there is any other company that has such a prodigious selection of people. Often it is just one or two people who are putting together something fairly simple that is lower in accuracy. Now, of course, just because you've got a huge team doesn't necessarily mean that you know what you're talking about, that you're going to
Right.
be any more accurate, but it's kind of a prerequisite for the possibility, at least, of accuracy. Um,
Correct.
so, yeah, to go back to your question for me specifically, um, okay, so there's a couple of things. One of them is that so not every report will give a percentage probability, but we do give it when we can. So some of them are percentage probabilities. What I found is that when there is a report that gives a high risk that is top 1 or 2%, so if they tell you you're in the 98th or 99th percentile, the person always has the issue. The only exception I found, or has had it at least, the only exception that I found to that is do it with I've done it with a lot of health gurus, people who've been in the health and fitness world a long time and kind of walking the talk just to a large degree. And then those are the only people I found who maybe have never developed that specific issue. um, Maybe if I list like a few examples of the kind of things it can tell you, it would help, because as you said,
Yeah,
like
definitely.
feeling tired or something like that obviously happens to everyone.
Right.
But let me list a few things to just give you an example of how specific it gets. So I'm just going to pull it up in front of me. So talking about uh, more general things, but yeah. So things like chronic pain, being overweight, your tendency to regain weight, your tendency to have different allergies and intolerances, erectile dysfunction, sleep apnea, snoring, blood sugar imbalances, appendicitis, gastrointestinal infection, sinus infection, urinary tract infection, peptic ulcers, chronic Lyme disease, your ability to your need for different nutrients. So let me be specific and give a couple of examples for me. So a couple of things that came up for me. First of all, I was in the top 99th percentile for having sinus problems. I've had
Mm-hmm.
sinusitis my whole life. The very first, if I'm anything other than optimal health, the first area that will show up is my sinuses. The second area will show up is my digestion. So that's always what shows up for me. So that was pretty accurate. But if we look at lab tests, so it said I have a tendency for an underactive thyroid. I have a tendency for high levels of lead, or I'm not as good as detoxifying lead. And I have a tendency for low levels of, or an increased need rather, for L-tyrosine, which is a specific amino acid. So I do tests. I do medical tests, and I look back at old medical tests I did. TSH 6.5, 4.5, low T3, like indicators of significant hypothyroid that even by medical standard would be considered, hypothyroidism.
Mm-hmm.
But what was more interesting to me is when I did a very thorough nutritional toxic test, the Genova Diagnostics, what's it called? Nutrival tests that test a couple of hundred different markers. My lead levels were sky high, 27 micrograms per deciliter, where the reference range is like up to, I think, around 3 micrograms per deciliter. So the level at which the World Health Organization says that it's a dangerous level of lead is 45. So 27, 45. I was well on the way to that. The level that is dangerous for a child is 5. So I went to then my NHS doctor, my normal medical doctor over here. They tested it. They confirmed that it was accurate, that it was extremely high. I said to that medical doctor, is there a chance that this could be causing all my symptoms? Because when I look it up, when you have such high levels of any poison, certainly including lead, it can create all kinds of issues, including digestive issues, anxiety, malnutrition, etc. And all they had to say is, yeah, could be. And they said, we'll retest you again in a year. So they were not very helpful.
Now, was your DNA report, it said that your lead levels were high or that you would be prone to getting high
Prone to,
level?
prone to, yeah,
Prone to. So you had to get independently test your levels and you said, oh, wow, they really are high.
yeah.
Got it.
So
And
genetics cannot tell you what you definitely are, but it can tell you what you have a higher risk of, what you have a higher
right.
tendency for. I do encourage people always to then go off and do testing if it exists to confirm it rather
Sure.
than, just acting from that. But given how many different tests you can do and how expensive and time consuming that is, to start off with genetics, which is relatively cheap and simple and uninvasive, to see, okay, I have a tendency for this, I have a tendency for that. Maybe it's worth testing. I mean, another example of a business partner of mine, I don't usually share people's stories because, it's private, but this person, we've talked about it publicly on the podcast before, he was someone who was not into health, not, very, very normal life in terms of, freely eating whatever he wants and, all that kind of stuff. And he was telling me he was feeling exhausted and all the rest of it. And I was like, God, it really sounds like hypothyroidism to me, but I've just realized that's it for me. Maybe I'm projecting, I'm not a doctor. What am I talking about? I don't know. Anyway, I do that. He gets his genetic test results. We test it with him. He was in the top 1% percentile, most likely to have thyroid issues. And so because I showed him that, he goes, all right, then I'll go and test it. Right. So he went to a
Mhm.
doctor, had it tested. Sure enough, he had Hashimoto's. And so he got that treated by a doctor and he's feeling a hell of a lot better. So, that's another example that not that this is going to diagnose something for you, but that it can prompt you to get a diagnosis. So there's
Right.
a couple of examples. The tyrosine is crazy as well. So tyrosine is an amino acid. It's not even considered essential, right? And yet when I did the NutriVal, it showed that I had, very low levels of tyrosine. Even supplementing tyrosine to, already eat a reasonably high protein diet. I started supplementing 500 milligram, 1,000 milligram, 2,000 milligrams. And then I would do the NutriVal every 6 months, something like that, to see if it's still showing as deficient. Still showing as deficient. Like, I last did it 6 months ago. So I don't know. Something like 18 months later, it's still showing as deficient, even though I was having a reasonable protein diet and supplementing with it. So it just showed to me that you know that and there weren't that many nutrients that it said that I needed more of. So,
Yeah.
it's things like that that seem to be beyond coincidence to me.
Um, that I think definitely that would be much more than just a coincidence. And just out of curiosity, you had first said something about Lyme disease, chronic Lyme disease. Of course, that's caused by an infection to
Yes.
start with. A tick bite with Borrelia or whatever. But the genes can tell you who's going to suffer from chronic disease or not be able to overcome the initial symptoms. Is that not related to like who gets treated with antibiotics quickly? Uh,
It's a great
Elucidate that a
question.
little a little bit.
It's a great question. Let me answer that with another example that applied specifically to me again. So, um, remember I said I could hardly eat any food without having these digestive symptoms, right? So I
Hmm.
thought I had food allergies and food intolerances, right? Again, in this alternative health world, that's kind of common. That's just what you assume.
Right.
And when I got my genetic test results back, I was surprised to see it basically said I have no genetic predisposition to any food allergies or intolerances except for a non-celiac gluten. But that was it. Like everything else, all these other foods that I was reacting to badly. And so, I'm looking for clues as to what's going on in my genetics. And it says I do have a high risk score, very high risk for IBS.
Hmm.
Now, as you probably know, IBS is like almost like a non-diagnosis. Whenever the word syndrome is included in diagnosis, it basically means they don't know what causes it, right? Or they
Correct.
definitely know with IBS, well, not definitely, but likely is that reducing your fermentable carbohydrates will kind of reduce the symptoms. But there's various theories as to what causes it, right? Some people say it's SIBO or large intestine pathogenic dysbiosis. Some people say it's the nerves. I've heard theories about the endorphins system. I've heard various different theories. Anyway, the point is,
Hmm.
no one knows for sure what causes IBS. So, how could this report accurately predict that these are the symptoms I would end up having? The answer is it doesn't have to understand the cause, it's only looking at correlation. So, it's looking at SNPs. It's saying, okay, we have surveyed a lot of people, done a lot of research, and people with this SNP, this SNP, this SNP, and this SNP. And again, in each report, there is a page where it lists all the genes and all the SNPs. People who don't want to get into that level of detail don't have to. We make it as
Hmm.
user friendly as possible. But for someone like yourself who's more skeptical, you can absolutely go and look at every gene, every SNP, research it for yourself. Oh, why would that be contributing to it? Um, and so yeah, it is not looking at causation; it's looking at
Causative.
correlation.
Right. And that makes sense. And I think that if you have a large enough sample size and you've got really good history of everyone who's submitting their DNA, eventually you're going to have a really good, strong correlative data that you can say, well, we don't know why, but it looks like you're going to develop, psoriasis in your lifetime, and may or may not happen. But yeah, that makes total sense. I think that's really kind of cool. So um, you got how did you get better with the data that you received?
Yeah, it's a good question. So lead is one of the trickiest things to deal with. My understanding is your body doesn't really have a system for detoxifying. The whole problem with lead is that your body mistakes it for other minerals like calcium. So one of the only things you can really do is make sure you're getting enough minerals like calcium, which I realized my diet was extremely low in. I think the recommended normal daily amount is 1,000 milligrams a day. My genetics showed that I need more than average, and I realized when I actually calculated it all, I was having like 200 milligrams a day. So I was having nowhere near enough calcium. So I changed that up, made sure I was getting a sensible amount of that nutrient. And then the other thing is just really supporting the detoxification system in general, so there isn't any backlog in general. And then doing infrared sauna on like pretty much a daily basis. So infrared.
Stopped eating paint chips, I guess, huh?
Well, so this is interesting because usually when you have high lead, it's usually they talk about exposure as the main thing that you can control, right? But
Right.
here's the thing. My wife and I have been living together in the same house for the last 10 plus years at that time, eating the same food, drunk the same water, breathed the same air, taking the same supplement, traveled to the same places. Her lead levels were less than one, mine were 27. So
Wow.
it wasn't exposure. As I said, when I looked into the World Health Organization stuff, even they say that what happens with lead is that it tends to get stored in the bone. Like I said, your body mistakes it with calcium. Now, every cell in
Mhm.
your body obviously utilizes calcium, but it's especially built up in the bone. So, and it's got a very long half life. I believe, again, off the top of my head, 20-year half life. So
Hard to get rid of it. Yeah.
yeah, you can have that exposure a long, long time ago, and your body puts it in the bones, and it's just like this slow release. It's like a slow release poison pill in the center of your body, constantly leaching into your blood. It's really very, very unpleasant having lead
Yeah.
toxicity. But anyway,
Wow.
like doing a lot of infrared and sweating, and basically that gets out all the minerals. You know, calcium and magnesium, the good ones as well. But it's also getting out the lead. So as long as you're replenishing, rehydrating, and replenishing the minerals, then it's fast tracking that process.
And then tell me like how it was when you started to notice the effects of getting rid of that lead from your body.
Well, fantastic. I mean, as I
I
said,
mean, was it gradual or was it like suddenly like, wow?
it comes in waves. It's like, so it's a wave of feeling better and oh great, fantastic. Maybe there's even euphoria, and then there's a wave of feeling worse again. And so what I would say is it's like waves up and down, and eventually your lowest point becomes better than your highest point used to be, but you still have low points. So symptoms still come back sometimes. Again, my understanding is, your body will release the toxicity in waves into the blood, and then once it's high in the blood, then it gets, your brain, your kidneys, everything is affected by it. So, yeah, you have better and worse days, but I mean, yeah, it's so much better than it was.
That's awesome. That's really amazing. And so, of course, you were motivated by that experience and wanting to learn more about it and probably help other people, right?
Yes.
So, is that how you got into like exploring your own company? Tell me how that worked. Like,
Yeah.
did you partner with the company you used, or
Yeah.
did you start from scratch?
No, there was no way I could start from scratch. It would take years to catch up with them. So, as I said, they use a company called Omics Edge, um, and so I love their service. I think it's excellent, but it is very, very complex for the average person. It's even though they have a practitioner and a user portal, but to me, the user one is still very complex. I think it takes someone with a high level of interest or commitment to really work their way through it. And the price point was also fairly high for the average person. And
Like, what are you
so
talking about?
uh, I don't want to misrepresent them, but I believe at the time that I bought it, I think the price keeps changing, so I don't want to misrepresent them. But the time I bought it, I believe it was $200 or $300 a year. So it's not nothing for the average person.
Why
Um,
do you say a year? It seems like it would just be a one-time test.
Well, the test is one time, but access to the portal, which gives you your results, and they're also we are releasing new reports all the time whenever there's new information and evidence and all the rest of it.
Oh,
Um,
gotcha.
so it's access to a portal which gives you your results based on the data.
Got it.
I think that
So yeah,
they've changed their pricing. I think since then as well to not be yearly, but that's what it was at the time.
okay, so you synced up with them somehow and told them that you were interested in kind of developing a relationship.
Yeah, and basically just to do one that is simpler, so it doesn't have all the complicated ability to look up every gene and SNP and stuff like that. But it does give what they agreed is what most people actually use, which is the reports, which gives the information. So it gives your risk score and it gives the personalized recommendations based on your DNA. Every recommendation comes with an impact score and an evidence score. So again, for people like yourself, you can go, I'm not really interested in doing something unless there's a lot of evidence behind it. Okay, then you only do the ones that have a high evidence score. For people who
Mhm.
are very concerned about getting results, they would focus on the things that have the highest impact score for them. And then there's numerous scientific studies, references for every single sentence of recommendation. It's extremely science backed. There is
Mhm.
the, I would say to the point that sometimes I have to apologize for it because if it's not mainstream, it's not in there. Like every single recommendation has to, for instance, even if we know that something, a supplement, a lifestyle change, a food, whatever, can help with an issue, we can't have it in there as a recommendation unless there are studies showing it helps with the specific SNPs. that a person has. So it has to be science based. That's how it's done. And yeah, to go back to your question, I basically said, I would like to make it more accessible, and I would like it to make it easier to use. So in terms of accessible, I'd like it to make it available a lot cheaper. Part of that was having a lot of different collections that are focused on a specific result. So I know one of the things you're interested in is beauty. So we have like a
Hmm.
beauty collection, right? If you're interested in
Right.
weight loss, there's a weight loss collection. If you're interested in hormonal health, there's a hormonal health collection. If you're interested in detoxification, there's a detox. If you're interested in nutrition, there's a nutrition, etc. We have over 20 different collections where you just get reports which are relevant to the thing that you're actually interested in. So
And
those are the
cheaper
two
than
things that we
the
changed.
comprehensive report.
Yeah, significantly cheaper. Yeah. So, I mean, it depends a little bit on the collection, but for roughly $50, full price, if you already have your DNA data from someone else, you can go in and get information that's helpful and relevant for whatever you're interested in.
So you're not consider your company is Genetics Insights.
Genetic insights.
Genetic Insights. You're not a competitor to this other company. You're more of a partner.
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah. As I said, I'll freely recommend them. If I think that someone wants to go heavily into the research and is more of a practitioner, I might say, yeah, maybe SelfDecode would be better for you.
I mean, why would they be interested in giving you access to their systems if they're not benefiting?
They are benefiting. We pay for every user. We pay them for every
Got it.
person.
Oh, okay.
And
So
and
you
and
run it.
and they and Omics Edge do it with a bunch of other companies. We're not the only one.
Got it. Okay. So tell me about the structure of your company. Like how many people are there? Like what's it like? Is it sort of like a research lab, or is it more like a business office? Who does all of the research and helps you in you know determining what new studies or new avenues should be looked at?
So all of that is done within Omics Edge. All we are doing is presenting the reports with the
They do the
information.
science, and then
They
they
do the
help you.
science and they do the AI. Absolutely. All we're looking at is how do we let people know about this wonderful thing? How do we make it more accessible? How do we make it more easy to use? That's our focus.
Okay.
They're doing all the science behind it.
And so, if you're someone like me and I don't have any of my data because I've never done one of those tests, can you get it directly through you, or do you have to start with Ancestry or one of those services?
Yeah, it's a great question. We can absolutely get it through us. If you go to our website and you order any of the collections, when you go to checkout, a little pop up will go and say, "Do you need a DNA kit? Would you like to add it to your
Mhm.
cart?" And if you do,
Okay.
you can add it. So honestly, in interviews until recently, I was saying to people, by all means, use another service like 23andMe and Ancestry because I am totally happy for you to have both experiences and compare them. I think we contrast very well to the other companies. But a few weeks ago, I found out that 23andMe were restricting people downloading their raw data. So now I no longer recommend that. So I would say if you absolutely want to be sure that you're going to get access to your raw data, then the only person that I can guarantee will give it to you is us. But obviously, if you already have it from somewhere else, then fantastic.
So we would receive a DNA kit in the mail and then send it back, and it goes to Omics Edge,
Yeah.
and then you would send us a report when it's available. And then what other kind of ongoing interaction is there with your company? Is there like updates or support, or is it just kind of like
Yeah.
the service?
Yeah, we provide all that as well. So I try and educate, So on my YouTube channel, I have like an episode on the best understandings that I have on as many health issues that I feel capable of speaking on. If there's an area
Mhm.
that I really don't feel that I have expertise in enough that I can make an episode about it, then I will bring on an expert. So we do that as well. And uh, so the idea is that a person can go through all their reports just like they can with any other place, but they can also, go on YouTube and listen to someone actually talk about it and guide them through it. which is something that I felt was lacking in other places. I also do
Sure.
consultations. Obviously, I don't give medical advice, but for people who want, I just, I help guide them through, especially when people get the Limitless, which is over 300 reports. I help them go, okay, these are the ones that I would focus on first, and here's what I'd prioritize and point stuff out. This is interesting. Did you see this? Stuff like that. So if people want a one-on-one guide walkthrough, then I'm happy to provide that. Often, if stuff does come up, like the example I gave, that there's a potential for a medical issue, then I'll advise them what kind of practitioner they should seek out, what kind of
Right.
testing they might want to go for.
Have you had any feedback from physicians, like primary care physicians, who have encountered some of your clients? I'm imagining a bunch of primary care doctors getting a list of, like, I got all these possible risks, and they're like, oh no, not another one of these guys.
A
Let's get
hypochondriac.
the.
Well, I'm
um,
generally recommending private doctors. Well, first of all, I always tell people. I mean, I have some people email me about medical issues and asking if genetic insights help, and I always say, look, I'm in the UK, right? So healthcare is free over here. I always say, go to your medical doctor first. It's free, right? Get as much testing and evaluation as you possibly can, and then only come back to me if they basically tell you there's nothing wrong with you and they can't help you, right?
mhm,
Then we can have a look at your DNA and we can see maybe there's nothing else, and maybe we can recommend a private doctor, right? And if it's a private doctor, they tend to be more open to doing investigations that the client actually asks for.
got it. Well, there's so much to discuss, and I want to get into your service before we leave. But can we touch on a couple of topics real quick, if you have the time, um, in their relationship to genes? One of them I'm interested in is anxiety and depression, and another one is weight loss and diet. You've mentioned high carb or high fat. Um, and I don't know anyone who has lost weight with high carb, but
They do
the
exist.
question.
I do.
So tell me about, if you don't mind, like some of your anecdotes regarding anxiety and depression, and then we'll talk about diet.
Anxiety and depression, yeah. So one of the important things to ascertain with anxiety or depression, I would say, is as vague a diagnosis as IBS, right? It doesn't really say
Mhm.
what's actually going on. So we do have a report on both. In the case of depression, I think we call it low mood. One of our collections is called emotional well-being. So we look at the various factors involved in that. So we do have a report on each, that will tell you your general tendency towards it. But if someone came to me and said that they're interested in working on those issues, I would be looking at other factors related to it. So, for instance, with depression, it can be a lot of different things, right? It can be inflammation in the brain. It can be low levels of dopamine. That's probably actually the most common thing that I observe. It can be hypothyroidism. It can be blood sugar imbalance. There's at least, that's off the top of my head, there's at least a few different things that may be a factor there. Again, not talking about clinical depression that's in the realm of a doctor, more, normal depression where the doctor says that they can't really help you or they just want to give you an SSRI. So then we're looking at, okay, so what other factors are going on? So then I'll look at reports for those various issues, right? So I'll be like, okay, let's look at your dopamine report. Let's look at your oxytocin report. If the type of depression they feel is a sense of emptiness inside that can never be filled, I relate that to low levels of oxytocin specifically. If with anxiety, we might look at levels of GABA. Also look at hormones, right? If it's a man and they have a tendency to low testosterone, then they are going to tend to have low levels of GABA anyway, because high testosterone increases GABA and high testosterone increases dopamine. So then it's not about changing neurotransmitters; it's about the hormonal issue that underlies it.
Mhm.
Sometimes with depression, as I say, it's a lot of it is a blood sugar issue. If you can get them to stabilize their blood sugar by eating a meal with a decent ratio of protein, carbohydrate, and fat, first thing in the morning, and then keep their blood sugar stabilized throughout the day, then they start feeling a lot better. So there's a few different uh, approaches you can take. Anxiety magnesium, right? It's
Mhm.
sold as an anxiety cure. Of course, often it is not. But if a person happens to be very deficient in magnesium, then it can be, right? It absolutely is a
Yeah. Which I think most people are deficient, actually.
Sure, sure. But I mean, if they're so deficient that even a doctor would recognize it, is more what I'm talking about, like a medical doctor, right? That's fairly unusual. But yeah, I
Mhm.
agree. A suboptimal or subclinical deficiency can still contribute definitely to
Yeah. So
anxiety
it's just
and
gonna
depression.
mean you need a lot more investigation, um, if you get some kind of um, a report on big diagnoses like anxiety or depression that have a multitude of causes. You're just gonna have to dig in. Um, so,
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And that's where
um,
sometimes people want a little bit of help navigating it. Although, as I said, I try and make it as self-serve as possible, and I've kind of videos that guide people how to do it themselves as well.
gotcha. And, in regards to diet, like if someone says, "Okay, I want to lose weight to get to my ideal, goal, body mass index, whatever. Here's my DNA." Is it good enough that you could say, "Well, these are the most likely diets that are gonna be right for you, that are gonna get you to that goal or to be the healthiest for you?" Is it that precise?
Yes, but again, it's not. In this case, it wouldn't be spoon fed to you. So some people give you a report where they'll basically tell you, you should either be this type or this type, right? We don't do that because the truth is often life is more complicated than that, right? So we'll
Mhm.
actually. So for instance, I remember I met one person, a very unfortunate person. Genetically, and again, I have permission to talk about this one. She had an issue with genetically with digesting carbohydrate and with digesting fat and with digesting protein.
Oh,
And
wow.
she was a person who had a lot of health struggles throughout her entire life, had been to huge amounts of practitioners, tried huge amounts of diets, procedures, everything, and nothing had seemed to work for her. So what I'm saying is, the kind of pat answer, okay, you're either this type or this type, and both types are kind of good in their own way, are not always accurate, right?
Yeah.
Some
It's
people are
not
the
that
opposite.
simple.
They're actually fine with every type of fuel, you know? And so it's not always that simple, but a lot of the time it is a case that there is, one or two types of fuel that really don't work for them. And then to identify that and to realize that minimizing those is a good idea can be really helpful. Sometimes it is not a calorie source, but it's some kind of nutritional
Mhm.
issue. So I remember, again, one person I have permission to talk about, she had a genetic tendency to low iron. When she tested it, her ferritin was indeed extremely low. Once she got her iron up, she started losing weight. Exactly how that happens, I'm not sure, but I believe it was probably because you have to have iron at a certain level for your thyroid to function correctly. So even though she never tested this, I suspect that once her iron got up and her anemia was resolved, also her thyroid, her metabolism increased because her thyroid had enough iron to function to T freeze to get into the cell at a sufficient level, and she was able to lose weight that way. So sometimes it's kind of weird stuff that you wouldn't necessarily even think of, and yet resolving the underlying deficiency, has these unintended beneficial effects.
Mhm. And another thing that's really, I think, extremely valuable would be, not even if you're not having any issues, like you said, your test was predictive because you got the results many years after. But
Mm,
someone who's not really having any problems, but you get a thing that says you're like 99% for heart disease. Well, that's something that you can use to help protect yourself in the future, right?
definitely. Yeah, I mean, like for me, one of the things is bone health and osteoporosis. I'm 43 currently, so that's not something that I would be likely to be suffering with. But now I know that that's a tendency, and of course, thinking about it, yeah, in fact, my mother did actually have that. I
And you'll
can
pay attention, right? You'll pay
Yeah, I can
closer
follow
attention.
those recommendations and prevent it happening in the first place. And what's
Mhm.
the saying? An ounce of prevention is worth more than a pound of cure. I mean, I'm
That's it.
sure as a doctor, you wish people, listen the first time, right? Rather than the 10th time once it's got bad enough that now they're going to listen.
How about in the world of beauty? Are there any genetic markers that you've come across? Or do you look at someone's report and say, "Oh, I hate to inform you that you are ugly"? No, I'm just kidding. What? No, seriously. Aging,
Yeah.
skin problems, things like that. What? Any specific ones that you've come across?
Yeah, so we have a hair, skin, and beauty collection. And so I put a diverse range of different reports in here. I'll see what your opinion is as to whether you agree that they're relevant or not. So there's kind of, direct skin issues. So we have a report on your tendency to have acne, hives, psoriasis, rosacea. So all of those we can predict in a correlative way, like we talked about earlier, using genetic reports. Skin elasticity, stretch marks, skin hydration, and facial wrinkles. We have reports on
Yeah,
all of those. So we can look
that
at
one
the.
there I think is great. All of those categories are what we deal with a lot. So
Okay. Yeah. So you can absolutely see if there's a genetic tendency towards those things. Just to go back, you could say, well, how does it, like, let's say you already have, I don't know, rosacea. How does it help to have a genetic report telling you you're likely to get rosacea? I think it, on an emotional level, it actually is really helpful. It really
Mhm.
was helpful to me, for various different things to go, oh, okay, this is just the way that it is. Like I can stop fretting, and as you said, like the hypochondriac keeps going to the doctor. Why do I have this? Why do I have that? Right? It could just be, and I was a bit like that, but now I'm like, oh, this is just the way I am. These are the cards that I've been dealt. And I say to everyone, like a lot of people ask, do I have good genes or bad genes? They're waiting to hear the results if they have good or bad genes. But I say everyone has bad genes, some bad genes, right? And everyone has some good genes. Honestly, some people do have more problems than others, but still, everyone has problems, everyone has gifts. And so it's just really great to see what yours are. Sometimes people say to me, oh, my friends, they never get ill and they haven't been ill in 20 years. And I say, okay, but how's their mental health? And often it's like, oh, yeah, but they are struggling with anxiety or compulsive tendencies or addictions or something. And I was like, then for them, the problem is just showing up more there. And again, that's would show. I don't see that often, but I do see it occasionally in the reports where someone has very few high risk for physical problems, but they have it more of a mental emotional. That does happen. So everyone has weak points. It's so empowering to find out what your weakest links in the chain are so that you can address those, and then also be grateful for the gifts that you have.
Mhm.
You can, because generally when I go through people's reports, especially if they have the limitless, they have all of them. We spend quite a long time. We often sort it by risk, and so there's loads of high risk ones, and it's all quite negative. But I often, especially if a person seems like emotionally they're not particularly enjoying hearing all these negative stuff, I like to scroll to the bottom and go like, look at all these low risk things you've got. Look at all these good things you've got, right? Because it's so easy to focus on the negative, but you've got a low risk for this, low risk for this, low risk for this. Again, it's not a guarantee, but look at all the blessings that you've got that you didn't even realize,
Mhm.
right?
Have you seen that movie Gattaca with Jude Law?
Yes. Yeah, a long time ago, but yeah, I know what you mean.
I'm kind of reminded of that movie, where everyone's got their genetic profile, and then there's some people that are, they're just.
I'm thinking, imagine a few years when all this information will be on dating sites, right? And be like, no, I don't want
Exactly.
to.
Exactly. It's going to be crazy. Well, um, Elwin, you've given us a lot of awesome information, and I'm really excited to check out your site. Can you tell everyone your website, how we can order a kit and get a test done so we can look at what's going on with ourselves?
Absolutely, yeah. So if you go to geneticinsights.co, .co, genetic
Mm-hmm.
insights plural.co, then that'll take you to the Limitless page. But you'll see that's a website called Feel Younger. It's my other brand. I kind of combine them so everything's in one place. And you can
Okay.
see all the collections are there. Allergies, anti-aging, blood sugar, and sure enough, hair, skin, and beauty, the ones that we touched on today. They're all there. So you can select any of those, add them to cart. And as I said, if you need it, you'll be offered a DNA kit. If you don't need it, then just say no. And after that, you're not being sent reports. What you're sent is a login to a membership area where you can access all your reports at any time. But if you want, you can download them as PDFs. You can send them to other people. You can, do what you want. But
How
it's
much is the Limitless plan?
the Limitless is $200.
That's not bad.
197. No,
I
we're
think
not
that's
allowed to
worth it.
say lifetime from a legal point of view, but we don't plan on removing access at any point. So yeah, it's I would say it's a bargain. I'm actually been surprised how many people end up taking it. Well, pleasantly surprised, obviously. The only reason I say not to take it is if you're easily overwhelmed, because it does give you so much information. So
Hmm.
for people who have a tendency to be easily overwhelmed, sometimes I do recommend just get a collection of something that you're interested in, at least to begin with, so you can really focus on that, get results, and then maybe be interested
I
enough to
just
get the
go ahead
rest.
and get it all. I think you get more for your money that way, right?
Well,
And you
yeah.
can always tease through the data later. Do you get a lot of customers from the States?
Yeah, I would say the majority. I mean,
Wow.
plenty from UK as well, of course, but there's just less people here, right? So,
Hmm. Cool. Well, anything else you'd like to add?
just that, thank you for having me on, and
Yeah, sure.
for your viewers, stroke listeners, I'm very happy to extend a discount. So, as I said, I believe that we are already industry leading, best value for money, but for people who are willing to listen to a whole podcast like this that are obviously really interested, we like to reward that. So we're happy to give 25% off to any of the things we talked about today for
Wow.
your customers.
That's
If
very
you,
generous. So how do they do that? They go to the geneticinsights.co and then there's a promo code.
yeah, when you get to the checkout, just put in the promo code Dr. Z, DRZ.
Nice. DRZ. Um, well, I'll be the first one to use that promo code.
Awesome.
And I'll also include it in the description on the podcast when it airs on YouTube, probably in a few weeks. But that's great, Elwin. Thank you so much for your time and all of your information. It's really been awesome, and I look forward to learning more about your industry and your company and working with you.
Thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure.
Absolutely. Have a good night and take care.
Oh, that was fun. I really enjoyed your skeptical